Hello, nerds for Yang.
Hello, nerds!
Hello, nerds!
Hello, nerds!
Hello, nerds! Hello, nerds!
Hello, nerds!
Now with this campaign, bang, dang, it's and true. Come roll with the Yang Gang.
Hello, nerds!
Hello, nerds!
Oh my goodness, we have Mike Broihier, who's running for Senate in the great state of Kentucky. Welcome to the show, Mike.
Thanks, it's so excited. I'm so excited to be here. This is really fun already.
We know how to get it started. So before we get into the whole race in Kentucky, and we'll talk about kind of national events, for people who do not know who Mike Broihier is, can you just give us a little bit of background? Because you're not a household name in the Beltway or, in a DC kind of circuit. So what's your background?
Well, I 20 plus years in the Marine Corps. I went to Rutgers and joined the Marine Corps in '81, a program that allowed you to do your training in the summertime. So I joined while I was in college. And '84, I went on active duty, served around the world, started in Japan, and did a lot of time in Japan and Korea. And then I went to the East Coast. And from there, I spent 6 months on a ship in the Mediterranean with a Marine Expeditionary Unit, Special Operations Capable Expeditionary Unit, out to 29 Palms, California in the high desert. I had a couple of artillery batteries out there. And then we got deployed to Operation Restore Hope in Somalia, 92, 93 in Mogadishu. And that was exciting. But educational. And after that, the Marine Corps sent me to grad school for 2 years, which was awesome. And finished up my career, did 2 years in Korea as the Marine Corps' war planner, working with our Korean allies every day. And then my last 3 years, I was teaching at UC Berkeley. So I wrapped up my career teaching at Cal and met my wife there. And we decided we want to be farmers. So without any training or preparation or experience, we bought a 75-acre farm in Kentucky and just jumped into it. And so the list of our failures in farming are long and kind of hysterical, but they're all learning experiences. And so after years of trying and different things, we have an all-natural asparagus farm, and we sell. In fact, it's probably growing as we speak. It'll be coming up any day now, and I have no idea who's going to pick it. So kind of minding our own business, but along the way, I did some other stuff. I was a reporter and editor of our local newspaper, third oldest newspaper in Kentucky. I did that for 5 years. And my wife got sent to Afghanistan in the for the Marine Corps. She's since retired. She came back in 2010, said, dude, it's a crazy place. You got to go. So I got a job in Afghanistan. I worked there for over a year. And then our son went, so we're 100% on Afghanistan, and so that's my background.
Hold on. When she said you need to go out to Afghanistan, that's not a common conversation spouses have to. So what was that like?
No, you're going to see a trend here.
Okay,
we tend to throw ourselves into things like the military, and then we just. All right, we're going to be farmers now,
right.
But she really liked her experience in Afghanistan. In fact, we still have a lot of friends there. Very concerned about the place, but she came back and literally said, "Dude, it's a crazy place. You have to go." And so I got a job working for a defense contractor and worked on perimeter security on all the bases. That was interesting. And then subsequently, like I said, our son went to work in the same field that I was. So we're 100% on the old Afghanistan war.
Unbelievable.
Right. And so go ahead.
And then you decided, okay, let's run for Senate.
Exactly. No, well, there's a little more thought to it than that, Tom. But it was, despite these things, running the newspaper and going to Afghanistan on a whim, it took a lot to move us towards running for Senate. And that, we have a farm we have a sustainable farm. We have wind, we can generate our own electricity, chickens, pigs, our own beef, canned food. I mean, I shave my face with shaving cream my wife makes and stuff like that. And so the easiest thing to do when the world's kind of sliding into the ditch is to push the gate shut and say, we'll be all right. And, but both Lynn and I, as retired Marines, took our oath to protect and defend the Constitution very seriously. And, like I said, it would have been easy to slide the gate shut and let the world go to hell in a handbasket, but just couldn't do it. And the single point of failure in our system is Mitch McConnell. And as a Kentuckian, I thought I was kind of uniquely positioned to go after him. And so about this time last year, we actually decided to do it. Started talking to people here in Kentucky who knew politics, because I've never done this before, and got some good advice, and had a pretty successful launch. And me and Lynn have been slugging it out since July. And just recently had this influx of Yang volunteers, people coming off the national campaign. And I got to tell you, smart, enthusiastic, connected, and our lives have changed dramatically, particularly when you got 5 grown men living in your house, living in your 2-bedroom farmhouse. So a neighbor of mine pulled a mobile home over and parked it in the yard. We had 2 guys living out in the Winnebago in the yard, but they're fantastic. And when I say smart,
do they like asparagus? Do they eat asparagus?
Well, it's not coming up yet. We'll have to see. We'll try it out on them. But like us, when it starts coming up, you're like, oh, beautiful, we have asparagus. And 3 weeks later, you're like, oh, not another piece. But
yeah. I guess you probably consume a decent amount of asparagus soup over the season, huh?
Well, actually, what we do is we towards the end of the season, when it's just coming in, we tend to make a whole bunch of it and put it in the freezer. And just pile it up. And it's really nice in the wintertime to go, oh, we still got some asparagus soup, and break that out. But yeah, so that's how I got in. And really, it was a slow realization that Donald Trump is a symptom, and Mitch McConnell, people like Mitch McConnell, just greedy, selfish old men are the real problem. And I thought that I was uniquely positioned to knock him out, because he's never run against a veteran, never run against a farmer, never run against a teacher before. And that cuts a wide swath in Kentucky. It really does.
Yeah, like I would imagine he would probably prefer to run against like a social worker who's super kind of talking about feelings all the time, and maybe hasn't been in an executive position of making hard decisions. Like, you are not the classic Democrat that a typical Republican would want to run against.
No,
you don't fall into the, well, you did teach at Berkeley, so he'll probably bring that up.
That's okay, man. I'll tell you that the Berkeley experience was fantastic. I was stationed in Korea when I got the assignment, and I was on the phone, and I had 3 options. It was MIT, RPI, and Berkeley. And I'm on the end of a crackly phone line, and I said, any place but Berkeley. And the guy in DC said, yeah, Berkeley, and hung up the phone. And that's how I ended up going there. But all my, and there were genuine prejudices. I had never been there, didn't know anybody from there. And I'm willing to say I was 100% wrong. And it was fantastic.
You thought it was going to be communes and planned economy. Or what did you think before you got there?
Well, I thought it was just going to be hostile. And but I'll tell you what, my colleagues couldn't have been more welcoming. The students were bright, and the fun thing is that, as being like one of the lone guys in uniform at a place like Berkeley, is that you get invited to everything. Every time there's a conference or a panel discussion, it's like, yeah, get that Marine guy. Yeah, and right. So I ate more smoked Gouda and drank inexpensive Chardonnay than anyone probably needs to have in their life. But it was a fantastic experience. Plus, I met my wife there, so cool.
Yeah, well, that's worth it all on its own. Well, what were you teaching out there?
Well, there's the first NROTC unit in the United States was started at Berkeley, and the CO was a guy named Captain Nimitz. You may be familiar with his name. He went on to do something else I can't remember, but anyway, so
they named ships after him, right?
I think, yeah. but since you're actually part of the faculty there, a lot of schools kind of treat the ROTC guys at a distance, but at Cal and a couple other schools, you have to have an advanced degree, you have to be a certain rank, and but once you're on board, you are part of the faculty. So I got to teach some very interesting classes. My favorite was a class called Leadership and Management that, students got a lot of training in management. We had, kids come from the business school.
Right.
And so they said, well, we got this guy here with 20 years of experience leading Marines. Let's let them talk about going from the science of math or science of management to the art of leadership, and try to bring them along to take all that management skill they learned and then talk about inspiring people, motivating people to do more, to give their best, and what you owe them as a leader, your responsibilities to them, their health, their welfare, things like that. So it was a great class. And the bad thing was I had these retired professors who would take my classes all the time, and they took that class 3 or 4 times, which means you can't recycle your jokes. So.
Well, good for you that if you got them to come back as repeats, they must have really enjoyed it.
It was fun, but then they'd want to go out to lunch and talk about it. I'm like, no, I want to go for a run.
Yeah. I got to ask you, Mike, you have some interesting wall decorations there. Can you, I'm not able to really understand it. Moscow Mitch. Oh, geez. Got it. Okay.
Extreme close up.
Yes. I didn't see the Moscow Mitch. I just saw sort of this kind of Soviet era style visual design. Well, let me ask you this, Mike. You have talked about Mitch being a problem. I'm curious, what's your view of the president? Because it sounds like you're very focused on him being the root cause. Do you feel like Trump is what's your take on him, and how is he viewed in Kentucky?
Very well. Trump's viewed very favorably for whatever reason. But I'm not running against Trump, so I'm going to leave that one alone. But so a friend of mine is a civics teacher in Chicago, and just a friend of mine from high school, and he called me, and he's like, "How the heck do I teach civics these days? What do I tell the kids? Do I teach civics as history?" And the problem is this: I think that we might be able to survive 4 years of Donald Trump, but we will not be able, as a republic, to survive 4 years of Donald Trump and 6 years of Mitch McConnell, because the foundations of our republic are crumbling. There's no check on the executive branch. That's the responsibility, obviously, of the legislative branch, and they're packing the judiciary with ideological judges and their lifetime appointments. Mitch McConnell was here in Kentucky a little less than a year ago, and had talked to a private group, and he told them, he said, "I'm changing America forever," and he really meant it, because they put over 140 judges on the bench with lifetime appointments, and we're looking at replacing at least 2 Supreme Court justices, and that literally will change America, probably for our lives, because they're going to be around for 30 or 40 years. So while I can't do anything about Donald Trump, I can knock out Mitch McConnell, because he's the one who's not doing his job.
So with Mitch, if you're a resident of Kentucky, I'm guessing there's probably only a couple degrees of separation between you as a voter and someone that may have benefited from some massive federal spending, where he kind of directs the omnibus bills towards the home state. And I'm wondering, do you ever encounter voters who may say, "Yeah, I know he's not great, but he brings the money from the rest of the country in"?
Well, it's even easier when your wife is the Secretary of Transportation, and Elaine Chao is Mrs. Senator McConnell, and if you want to drop in $60 million for a highway bypass,
it happens.
Just do it. It happens. But it
ain't going to Massachusetts.
Right. No. No. New York, California, I think they're going to watch their roads crumble. But yeah, and I have to say that so his 2 big successes are road funds and a federal project to get Asian carp out of our fishing waters.
Oh, yes.
Yeah. As invasive species.
Yes.
Probably needed to be done, but didn't need to see him out there on a boat supervising it. But anyways, yeah. So
what do voters think? Because they may have to kind of vote for the country ahead of their local interests. Is that the trade-off they need to make, or do you think there's a way to still stand up for Kentucky but also do the right thing for the Republic?
It doesn't make me proud to say this, but we're at the bottom of every list that you do not want to be on the bottom of. And and what the Kentuckians are realizing is that we've absolutely been left behind. We've had an extractive economy for 200 years here. First it was timber and lumber, then it was coal, and we've been left holding the economic and environmental bag on it. And people made a lot of money out of Kentucky. Kentucky coal, Appalachian coal built America's great cities. And we literally are left holding the bag. The economy here is the seventh worst. But we have so many other problems. We're like number one in cancer deaths, number one in child abuse, number one in child homelessness. We have twice the number of people on twice the number of national average on earning a minimum wage. Wages have been absolutely stagnant, and so while they may get a constant stream of the economy is doing great, people in Kentucky know they've been left behind educationally, medically. The fact that we don't have rural broadband, just really don't have it. And I think it's a slow realization, but McConnell and people like him have been playing this thing in Kentucky year after year. Guarantee you, they will not go out to coal country this time and tell them that coal's coming back. They played that card 6 years ago. And every year is we're bringing back coal, but they are not going to go out there because they will not get a warm welcome. They will not get a warm welcome.
Because they heard that already, and they know fool them once, shame on Mitch. Fool them twice, shame on them. I guess.
Or as George Bush said, "Fool me twice, I won't get fooled again."
That's right. He had a way with words. With words.
But don't you kind of miss him now?
Well, it's funny because he seemed so he seemed to have so much difficulty making competent decisions, but then it's all relative. And I'm curious as a military man and a veteran, like, what's your view on foreign policy and sort of like the role of kind of future military intervention? I know, Kentucky must be like a very red-blooded, obviously pro-America place. But that doesn't always mean, in my opinion, like invading lots of places simultaneously. And so I was curious, like, what's your take on foreign policy going forward?
Well, the former Secretary of Defense, Jim Mattis, godlike status in the military, not just in the Marines, but people love this guy. And as he was trying to coach Trump through life, he said, if you do not fully fund the State Department, you're ultimately going to have to buy me more bullets. And he didn't mean it in a good way. He was, and he was very gently trying to, because the State Department's been ravaged. I have two friends of mine from that I met back in Korea. And actually, I conducted their wedding. I'll be happy to tell that story sometime over a beer. But they retired from the State Department, and when I travel out to Western Kentucky, it's quite far. I stay over at their house, and ask them. I said, "How are things in the State Department?" And career Foreign Service officers are bailing left and right. And and I'm sure you saw Ambassador Marie Yovanovitch's testimony. Brilliant, but not just a brilliant public servant, but a dedicated public servant whose heart was in the right place, cast aside, and not cast aside, but belittled and almost criminalized. And so morale in State Department is about as low as can be. And as a Marine, I would much rather have people talking than shooting. We need to really, really fully fund the State Department, because our engagement, and it's not just our military problems, but economic problems and even our immigration problems are starting far overseas. And the State Department and U.S. foreign policy is the place where we're supposed to be making first contact with people, diplomatic, spreading information, providing economic incentives for diplomatic nations, and always, at least in my book, the military is the last option.
Yeah.
Now, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just gonna say it's so fascinating because sometimes the most hawkish people are not people who've served in the military, and it seems like a lot of people who are veterans are much more pro diplomacy first than non-veterans.
Well, it like if you've seen it up close and personal, and between my wife and I, we have too many friends killed and maimed or damaged in ways you can't see.
Yeah.
And it's not a big adventure. It's not a game, and it's not about the flag. And it's can haunt your dreams. Yeah. And so it makes you, and people always say that, they're like, God, you're kind of scary on the outside, but you're a big squishy ball on the inside. And I'm like, listen, if you can do the things I've done in my life and not become a more compassionate person and appreciative of other people, then I don't want to know you. I know very, very few people, not everyone's experience in the military is a positive transformation. They're all transformative, but most of them I think are good.
Yeah. Yeah. I wonder how much of the Senate has served or has family that are in the active service, because I mean, if you're going to vote to start another kind of engagement, you should have some skin in the game as a body. Yeah.
Small but growing, large number of veterans running. Last year in the 2016 cycle, I think it was a record number of veterans. And the good thing is they're young veterans, veterans of the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. Coming out and running, and even some old timers. Richard Ojeda in West Virginia. He's an old guy like me, but he's been blown up like 3 times in his life, and he's like, we don't need to go around doing this. We don't need to be going around starting wars with people. Yeah, but there's proper application in the military force. My own experience in Somalia. I mean, we got there in Christmas time '92, and people were literally falling over dead from starvation and diseases related to that. And then, within a couple months, we kicked the ports open, and humanitarian relief was coming in. And it was a great experience for me and for my Marines to see that, okay, there's a good part of it. There's a good side of this where the proper application of force in certain places can, and going back to George Bush, would ask why he sent us there. He said it would have been a scar on our nation's soul not to. And he was absolutely right. Yeah. We could stop these people from starving to death, and we did. Yeah.
Were you there like in late '93, like when the Black Hawk went down? And
no, and I got to tell you, I was shocked when I saw that, because what I saw in the streets there was not. It was more. That was very much like it was when I got there. But so I got there in December '92, left in about June, and you could literally go a couple days and not hear a gunshot, and you can't say that for major cities in America. Yeah. And I'll tell you, if you want to, if this is interesting to you, we turned our operations over to the UN, and the UN pulled in. We completely infiltrated the town. There was a Marine outpost or Army outpost every couple of blocks. And so literally it was impossible for people to move and traffic in weapons. And so when the UN pulled out, the streets, bad guys flooded back in, weapons caches opened up. And it wasn't a month after we left that 34 Pakistani peacekeepers were killed, which precipitated the whole hunt for General Aidid and the Black Hawk Down. And so it was our constant presence there that kept the lid on the violence. And, I believe the UN has a function. That isn't one of them.
Yeah. So it sounds like there was a vacuum after we handed over control. The transition wasn't a very, basically, it sounds like we as Americans had a very active role, kind of got it stable. And then when we transitioned it to the UN, that's when sort of things went a little sideways.
Well, they did it because they pulled in. Yeah. I mean, they literally contracted back onto the airport and the port and didn't go out in the city, which is where all the bad guys were. And, I was flying out and I was sitting next to a buddy of mine. He looked out of the window and went 30 days. And he was right. He was like within a couple hours of predicting how fast it would go into the ditch.
Hey, Mike, I want to call out that Kristen Slevin, who's been a supporter of the Nerds for Yang channel, now Nerds for Humanity channel, has just done a super chat, which I will use towards the channel's operating costs and our Spanish stuff. But I'm guessing you're also doing some fundraising for your campaign. Is that fair?
That is fair to say, yeah.
So, where can people go if they're liking what they're hearing from Mike so far, and they want to learn more, or maybe pitch in to help your campaign?
Well, thanks. It's MikeForKY.com. MikeForKY.com has a link to ActBlue, and that's the easiest way for people to donate, and I sure appreciate it. The newly injected Yang gang enthusiasm here has really increased our ability to fundraise. And people have been very, very generous, and it's been fun. I know we've been talking like military stuff, but you want to? Can we switch over and talk about? Because I'll tell you what, there's I'm really bad at this because I'll sit and tell stupid war stories all day and never. So I'm trying to get a little bit of discipline in my campaign.
No, Mike, you know what, man? We got to get you back on, because actually one of my favorite movies of all time is Black Hawk Down. And I'm guessing you've seen it, or maybe you haven't. You probably didn't want to watch it, or
couldn't.
Yeah.
And my son even had an Xbox game that I can't remember which one it was,
right?
But took place in Mogadishu, and it was so real and visceral. And, I did read the original serialized story that originally generated Black Hawk Down. That it was published in serial form, and I read it as it came out. But I got to tell you, it hit a little bit too close to home for me.
I totally understand. Yeah, I find the military to be at the same time, like, obviously extremely lethal as it needs to be, but I also admire the discipline and the commitment and the camaraderie and sort of the selflessness of the people in the military. I personally have grave concerns about politicians misusing it. And but let's talk about what is your central focus for your campaign. Like, what would you say are the things that you're talking to Kentuckians about that you would want to do differently versus a McConnell or anybody else running for the position?
Well, someone said, sum up your campaign in 3 sentences. And I can say it in 6 words: economic and social justice for all. That has been the root of my campaign. And it's funny, Thomas, when I started the campaign, I looked at economic and social justice as 2 discrete things. Mm-hmm. And the more I thought about it and read about it and firmed up my ideas, I realized that social and economic justice are like just completely linked. Not the same thing, but inextricably linked. And so that is the gist of my whole campaign. And whether it's about you're getting money out of politics, because of course here we have Kentucky and West Virginia have the hardest hit with the opioid crisis, and the fact that like a guy like Mitch McConnell can take millions of dollars of donations from big pharma, while literally billions of we're talking about high-powered opioid pills flood into Kentucky and adjacent West Virginia, and are killing people. 1,200 people a year die from opioid prescription opioid overdoses every year in a small state like Kentucky. And so whether it's that, or it's acknowledging the fact that we've just really, really stripped all the resources out of Appalachia, particularly, and left the people with a crumbling infrastructure, poor education, poor access to healthcare, and no economy to speak of as the coal production has dropped off and coal use has dropped off, and the fact that they deserve justice. And people always say in Kentucky, we've got this rural-urban divide. We have several big cities: Louisville, Lexington, Bowling Green, but the rest of Kentucky is very, very rural. But I got to tell you, the problems cut all the way across Kentucky, and so in the west end of Louisville, we have horrible pollution, and they have this thing they call West of 9th Street. But there's a significant delta in the age of people's life expectancy if you live west of 9th Street, and that's because of industrial pollution and air quality. But you go all the way east in Kentucky to a place like Martin County, where you cannot even drink the water. I mean, literally, water that comes out of the tap is completely undrinkable. So people say, So what I'm trying to say is this: is that the people in rural and urban areas have a very, very vested interest in things like pollution, and that's linked to healthcare. In fact, in both the cities and in the rural areas, people can't afford or have no access to healthcare. So, like I said, as I work through these issues, it's like, man, these things are just completely linked, and so we need to have a whole package. And that's and it's funny because I kind of backed into universal basic income. It was like, it wasn't like, oh, let me look at this in universal basic income, but it was like the more I looked at this whole spectrum of social and economic issues and the need to fund them and what is just and right and fair for people in Kentucky and the whole United States, the more and more appealing UBI became to me, and very self-evident.
Yeah, well, I'm guessing this is like a great kind of confluence of events where, because of the suspension of the Yang presidential campaign and your adoption of UBI as part of your platform, there's a ton of interest from the Yang Gang in terms of what you're doing. And I'm curious about, you talked about a lot of Kentucky problems. I'm curious why the Senate? Like you could go mayor, governor. How did you decide what role to go for?
Because Mitch McConnell is the single point of failure in the system. I could run, say I ran for governor, I couldn't affect the issue. I could run for city council, county judge, and I'm 58 today. As a matter of fact, I'm 58 today.
Happy birthday!
Oh well, hey, thanks. Rather, this is the way I chose to spend it. So I want to talk to you about these issues. It's so important. But really, it was I think when the founding fathers crafted our systems of checks and balances and separations of powers, they didn't imagine we'd have somebody so craven and thoughtless have so much power. I don't think they ever thought that the Senate Majority Leader could literally stop hundreds of bills just by not bringing them to a vote. I don't think that I don't think the founders imagined that they wouldn't come up for a vote. And so we've got, I think the going count is something over 400 bills passed out of the House of Representatives, many with bipartisan support. And Mitch McConnell just says, I'm the Senate Majority Leader. I don't have to bring them to a vote. And so they're dead. And he calls himself the Grim Reaper because that's where bills go to die. And he thinks it's funny. And I'll be honest with you, I'm singularly focused on this. There are other candidates in this race. Everyone, and I don't want to try to read their intentions. I have one focus. I'm going for the kill on Mitch McConnell. I'm going to rid the Republic of him, and I'm going to rid the Commonwealth of Kentucky of him. That's it. Get rid of him. Kick open the logjam. Get the. I hate to call them low-hanging fruit because they're very, very important bills. Universal background checks, Violence Against Women Act, Paycheck Fairness Act, the PRO Act for organized labor, and he's just not going to bring them to a vote because he is that kind of person. So get rid of him. Get the constructive juices flowing again in the Senate.
Unblock the artery.
Yeah, exactly. Going to give the Senate a stick.
Let me ask you this. I mean, I could argue that, well, the Senate's run by the Republican Party. It's in the Republican Party's interest to block a lot of things. And if it's not Mitch, it's going to be some other Republican that's going to, do whatever they can to derail, Democratic Party initiatives. And, he's just doing his job. Like what's so special about him versus any other Republican Party guy? He
is soulless. That's what's wrong with him. But I'll tell you, during the we had a senator here that we got rid of in November, or not senator, sorry, governor, a guy named Matt Bevin, and he tried to be Trump. He was obnoxious and rude and insulting, and literally went around picking fights with teachers and nurses. And I mean, the only people I don't think he picked on were firefighters, like real public servants. And so he thought he could be a mini Trump. And Trump came here, and his sons came here to campaign for this guy. And we just kicked him out in November. So even in a red place like Kentucky, even a Trump-loving place like Kentucky, we kicked that guy out because you can't be a mini Trump. He's the only, he's a one-off, and Mitch McConnell's a one-off. And now I'll tell you what, you get rid of Mitch McConnell, if we're going to, the margin in the Senate is just not that big. The governor of Montana is getting in now, which is huge because he's beloved. He's term limited. And so he's running now. And all of a sudden you've got Montana in play as a flippable state. And, golly, get rid of Mitch McConnell, flip 4 other states, and all of a sudden you've got a Democratic House and a Democratic Senate.
Yeah.
And that puts a different spin on things.
So let me ask you, Mike, on some other related topics. Do you have a view on sort of the budget and spending? Like one of the things that people love about UBI is that it could be a game changer for poverty, for people who are caretakers at home, but it's also not going to be cheap. And I'm curious what your thoughts are because, we have a pretty big budget deficit already. What are your thoughts on how we should think about the federal budget?
Well, I think that, I guess the first thing is I just remember when Republicans were against deficits and debts. Those were good times.
Tea Party days. I remember with the tri-tip hats.
Exactly. And they were all.
Where are those guys?
Where are those guys? The last one is Rand Paul. And sadly, he is also here in Kentucky. Yeah. So that guy goes next. But, you always need to be good wardens of the taxpayers' dollars, good stewards of the taxpayers' dollars. As a military guy, it's just funny when you work at different levels, at one level, you can't get duct tape or chem lights. And another job I had, a guy told me that $1 million was decimal dust in his budget. I was like, what do you mean decimal dust? He goes, I don't even count it. They said, tell me when you're done with that $1 million, I'll get you another. It was like, like I said, literally going from one job where ordering a box of pens was a big deal.
Right.
To another place where people has just like distracted by someone asking for $1 million. But so here's the way I look at it is that if we're going to spend money, I would much rather be injected at the local level. Do we need to be giving, do we need to be subsidizing the oil and gas industry? No, and so the money we spend subsidizing a lot of industries, and I would just rather that money be injected at the lower level. And like in my particular case, we're seeing a huge drop in family farms. Across the country, hundreds and hundreds of family farms are lost every single day. And on the little road that passes for a highway in front of my house, up and down, family farms are going. And if people had a UBI, had that padding, they would still be farming. And this is when I get to the social and economic justice being tied together. Family farms are much more sustainable. They're much more responsible with resources. They don't pollute as much. Family farmers don't ride around spraying Roundup on everything, which runs into our streams and our drinking water and everything else. So, and the problem with me as someone who's kind of newly said, okay, this UBI is going to work. The temptation is to use it as a Swiss Army knife. And no matter what the problem is, say UBI will fix it, but it will fix a lot of problems. And particularly, I cannot help but think as a rural Kentuckian, but small businesses, small family farms would stay because people could stay. And we have I think I said earlier, we have the worst child homelessness rate in the nation. And that means that I think up to 30% of our children are not with a parent, not in a home with a parent. And so we've got grandmas, grandfathers taking care of kids. We have a mass incarceration problem. So we have displaced children, and the people who are providing care, either to the elderly, to the sick, or to displaced children, UBI will help all that. And I would much rather spend money, even at a deficit, to do that than bail out a corporation.
All right. Well, I think we'll now transition into some viewer questions.
All right.
So one of the first one that came up related to what we were just talking about is UBI. How would you plan on funding it? Is it different from the Yang platform, which was generally mostly through a value-added tax, or are you thinking of another way to fund it?
Well, I like the VAT. I like the VAT a lot. I've traveled an awful lot, and most places in the world have a VAT. And it's just not that you're not inventing something. And I, as not being the brightest guy in the world, I'd rather not have to go invent something. Yeah, I like the VAT. And I think, and not only that is I think that I like the exponential use of the money, particularly, and I hate to keep talking as a rural Kentuckian, but that money stays when you spend local money locally. And I mean locally, not at the local Walmart, but a local store, shop. You get a knock-on effect every single time that dollar is passed on. And so, yeah, I think that's the way to go. And it's not like it's something that's not practiced in, I'm guessing, over 100 countries around the world.
Yeah. Now, I've heard some people, when they hear that, they say, oh, but, this is America. Like, we're not going to take, the VAT's something that the Europeans do, and they may do that in Japan, but that's anti-American. Like, why would we ever copy France? They have a VAT. They're terrible. How do you respond to that?
There's a certain number of people, Tom, that you're never going to convince. And I mean, I've got 90 days till less than 90 days till the primary. So someone who just reasons like that, I'll say, here's a sticker, have a nice day. And that's all you can do. Because that's all you can do, man. Because, it's like the people who don't believe in science. They don't believe that climate change is real. They don't believe in vaccinating their children. I hope I'm not offending someone who's listening. But if someone if someone who will not vaccinate their child, I'm not going to argue economics with them either. And I think they probably have got the same hat on.
Well, I think that's a very realistic perspective. A good buddy of mine used to say, if someone didn't reason their way into a position, you're not going to reason them out of it.
May I use that?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
All right, good.
All right,
I love that, as a matter of fact.
Here's the next question. So you have an interest, you used to work at one of these things called newspapers, which back in the day,
I know.
They were kind of like a big deal. And we now talk about the media kind of as like the enemy of the country. And certainly there are biases in the media. I think a lot of us in the Yang Gang feel like, well, actually it's not all objective. And I'm curious, like, how is your experience in as a newspaper editor informed how you're thinking about becoming a senator?
Well, I think and this was definitely a local newspaper. I mean, this is a rural weekly, and so when I say a reporter and a editor, I mean the reporter and the editor. I had a lady I work with did sports, and then everything else that was not sports was me. And so when you go to every school board, ambulance board, fire board, city council, fiscal court, industrial, when you go to all these meetings that taxpayers don't have time to go to, you could not do it and have a normal life. But that was my job. And so you got to see, very quickly what was important to people, and how the sausage, at least in local government, is made, and how the impact of state money and federal money coming into a community. But also on the human side of it, and that probably informed it more to me, is that you get to see the highs and the lows of people's lives. I mean, you go to a couple fatal car wrecks where alcohol's involved or distracted driving's involved. I went to a wreck where a lady was dead, and the guy who hit her had his laptop. When they finally extricated from the car, he had his laptop on his lap, and he'd been watching a movie. And when you see horrible tragedies like that, not in the military where you kind of expect to see things like that, but you get humanized really fast, and you realize how close to the edge and how fragile every life is. And people I wrote a lot of stories where people open a new business and 9 months later it was closed. And when you got to see all the hope and everything they put into all their money, their friends' money, they invested their time, their energy, and their love into a project, and 8, 9, 10 months later they're out of business, and then flat broke. Yeah. So I guess I have kind of a long way around it, but the other thing I want to say about newspapers is that their rural newspapers, small newspapers, are still important because somebody has to go to those meetings. And I know there's this, we've got the pajama media. Those are people who are editorializing, it is easy to sit back and type out your opinion. But if you got to go sit through your 50th school board meeting, that takes a lot of it. You have to pay somebody to do that. And the last thing I'll talk about is objectivity. When I was editor of the paper, it was our 150th anniversary. So we did a 150-year retrospective, and I dug way deep into the archives and pulled stories, interesting stories from every year over our 150-year existence. Man, newspapers were not objective back in the day. I mean, that's why a lot of these papers are called the Daily Democrat or the Weekly Republican or whatever, because they took a side. And I mean, it makes Fox News look like NewsHour. They used to say some pretty scurrilous stuff, even in the paper I edited. I mean, you picked a side, and everyone else had done a deal with Satan, literally.
Yeah.
So when people say, newspapers are supposed to be fair and balanced, you want to be objective and fair, but you don't have to be balanced.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I guess the incentive is it probably if every newspaper were completely down the middle, it may actually hurt their readership. I mean, people may want that very kind of strong point of view, I suppose. And I guess that's the reality of media in general. So, I mean,
should you give equal print to? Should you give an equal number of column inches to anti-vaxxers? No. As an editor, you make a decision and say no. Right. and I know you use the editorial page to say they're wrong, but you still don't have to give them the same number of column inches as people are saying, yes, you need to vaccinate your children.
Yeah. So Jeanette wants to thank you for sharing your birthday with us. So,
thank you, Jeanette.
Thank you, Jeanette. And then for all of you guys who are doing the super chats, of course, I appreciate it, but I want to point you also to MikeForKentucky.com because he's gonna. What are you gonna do if you get some more money? What will you do with that money, Mike?
I'm gonna pay my Yang staffers. That's what I'm gonna. No, seriously, they're volunteers, and they turn down jobs like with Bloomberg and other campaigns, and it is humbling. And this is not, humble bragging. This is humbleness. I mean, the fact that they have torn up their lives and turned down salaries and not just salaries, but compensation and some other campaigns, luxuries, and literally are willing to live in a leaky Winnebago on my farm. If we, I'd like to start paying people.
Yeah, no, I
paying their expenses, paying their gas, something.
What about? Are you doing a lot of advertising, or are you focusing mostly on like events and stuff? Like, how do you want to deploy that capital? Like, if you obviously it's very admirable that you want to take care of your team, and then on top of that, like, where would you want to kind of invest?
Well, the one of my main components has raised an awful lot of money, and she has been advertising wall to wall since like October, and we have a much more nuanced plan, and it'll come into effect near the end when it'll really bounce. Right now, they're just grinding through money and frankly making people bored. So I'm gonna let them own that. I got a really brilliant young campaign manager. I think he's 22, came off Yang and just crazy smart. And he's got a plan, and it's to apply the right amount of advertising in the right places at the right time. Kentucky's so diverse that there's still a lot of radio market here in rural areas, and people still get broadcast TV in rural areas. So it's looking at the markets, and instead of just, throwing bundles of money into the advertising wood chipper and spraying it out, we're going to apply it surgically because we don't have money to splash around.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think the good news, I suppose, is Bloomberg showed us that money isn't everything.
Yeah.
And there's probably a point of diminishing returns, and ultimately the candidate matters a whole lot. And so I'm hoping that we'll see a lot more of you. Let me go to the next question. So Wanna See More says, hey, you talked about not subsidizing, big business as much. And if that happened, like if we didn't subsidize corn, if we didn't subsidize oil and coal and natural gas, wouldn't that result in the consumers paying more for those things? What's your take?
Well, I think we need to break out gas and agriculture.
Mm.
I think the world prices will go up, but I think that, and I have to tell you, when I started investigating UBI, inflation was the first thing that popped in my mind. If somebody has $1,000, won't their landlord just add $1,000 to their rent?
Mm-hmm.
And no, I think that every, that we have enough. I think we have enough data from countries with sovereign wealth funds. I think we have enough data from Alaska to know that, there may be a bump in there may be a jump in prices. Now, and I'll tell you, this is something that I've struggled with myself. He was talking about food. When I go to the supermarket and I see a gallon of milk for 88 cents. Now, I understand that some products are loss leaders. It's the reason they put milk in the back, because they're going to drag you through the whole store, and then you're going to get. But still, I know lots of dairy farmers. My wife and I milk jerseys for a little while too. One of our many projects that we didn't continue doing. But I'll tell you what, to produce a gallon of milk costs a hell of a lot more than 88 cents. And I know that. And so you take off the loss leader factor. I don't know how much it costs, but it's a hell of a lot more than 88 cents. So yeah, I do expect prices to go up, but I think there's enough data to show that that you do not get runaway inflation. Yeah.
Yeah. I also think I imagine a lot of libertarians would argue, hey, if the government's going to put money into and it's going to pick and choose like specific types of food and products to subsidize, it may be better to just let the people decide what they want to spend their money on versus saying, well, we're going to subsidize soy, but not this other crop or whatever, that kind of thing.
And you look at those subsidies don't go to small farmers.
Yeah.
They go to the giants, and which are tied to the petrochemical industry, the Monsantos and that produce, the Roundup that could blast. I'm not hung up on Roundup, but it's just particularly bad. And it's a bad way to farm as well, because it leads us to monocultures, and we are one genetic strand away from there being no soybeans. No matter how you subsidize it. So
No, I hear you. I live, as many of the audience know, I live in Switzerland, but I also live in a rural part surrounded by family farms.
Wow.
And it's just like a different world, where you can actually buy stuff from the farmers. They just put it like out there, like eggs, and then you leave money in a little jar and you just take what you need. Different.
That's an interesting point. Those eggs aren't refrigerated, are they?
No, they just put them out there. They're fine. And they're beautiful, like golden yolk, like delicious too. Yeah.
Well, yes, exactly. Because when you go to any market in Europe, the eggs aren't in a refrigerator case. You got to ask, why are they in a refrigerator case in the United States?
Yeah.
And they're in a refrigerator case in the United States is because the chickens are raised in such filthy, disgusting conditions that the eggs need to be washed. Well, once you wash them, you take the protective coating off them, and now they start rotting, and that's why they got to be in the refrigerator. So this, you can go down this rabbit hole of why is it better to produce food locally, but Tom, you nailed it. Because you can take those eggs and let them sit there out there all day, and they're perfectly fine. It's because the way they're raised, and that nice, beautiful orange yolk is because those chickens are out in grass and sunshine.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Yeah, they don't taste like the eggs I used to eat from Costco at all. Yeah. I don't know where those eggs came from. They were cheap though. The eggs in the US were way cheaper than here, but maybe you get what you pay for. Okay, here's another question. When you were in the Marines, how did you feel about the overall support you received from the government? And how do you feel about military expenditures in general?
Okay, yeah, good question. Well, I was in an interesting time. I got in during the Cold War, and then the wall came down, and then we switched strategies. And they're all kind of linked together because people don't know this, but we actually have a way that we're supposed to spend money. There's something called the Goldwater-Nichols Act, which basically says the president consults with his intelligence agencies and State Department, and he comes up with a national strategy and a national military strategy, and from that flows how we procure manpower and equipment and things like that. And all these things take time, to build up manpower takes time, and particularly to build big things like a new generation of aircraft, or to just build an aircraft carrier, can take, 8-10 years from when they lay the keel to when the thing floats away off into the ocean. So, during the early days, during the Cold War, we basically got whatever we needed. And, then during the Clinton administration, we cut budgets, but we got better at spending money. And, during the Clinton administration, they came up with a lot of smart things that like, for example, to order pens, you didn't have to go through the government. So they had a credit card, and you could go to, you could go out to Best Buy, or you could go to any place and buy the cheapest, like, copier paper, just like you do with your business. You wouldn't say, well, I have to rely on this huge supply chain to get something as simple as, paper clips or copier paper, things like that. And so we really reformed during, of course, because budgets were cut during the Clinton administration, but we got smarter about spending our money, and we also got more accountable, and we did things that were smarter. We did zero-based budgeting. In the past, what the DoD would do is just every year you just added 10% on and asked for that. Finally, it said, no, assume that you start with zero and explain why you need all this crap. And so I was like, this is a smart way. We're looking at the military as a business, and there should be some discipline. And then the problem comes in when you change administrations. Like under President Obama, we had a model where he had a cooperative international model where we would leverage our relationship with allies to, one, stay out of wars, and two, fight them more efficiently and less expensively if they did come about. And now in the Trump era, we're just gonna push all of our allies away. We're gonna go it alone, and that's a very, very expensive proposition. So I feel like I didn't answer his question, but it's expensive, and every time you change directions, it would be like, if you it's like you're buying a new car every 3 months, just to put it, and that loss that you feel when you go to trade in, and they don't care if that car is 3 months old or 2 years old, the trade is going to be the same.
Let me ask it this way, Mike. Do you think we should be spending more, less, or the same on defense?
Well, from my experience, my interest is in power projection, is getting to the fight and being able to get to the fight. Because the one sin you cannot commit if you're the military, if you have this huge investment, obviously the large part of our GMP is going into defense. You cannot not be ready when the nation calls. And so I don't know what that number is. I think we can spend our money wisely, but the most important part is taking a sober look at the world around us and looking at projections from intelligence services and not skewed through political lenses. If I get to pick and choose, our alliances will be with democratic nations or emerging democratic nations, and we'll be encouraging them economically. And I would rather be spending money economically than selling weapons to people. And I want to encourage our democratic allies, and I definitely want to encourage emerging allies. And that costs money and time, but you cannot prepare for everything. So you have to have an adult that believes in data, who takes a look at the intelligence without a political lens and says, this is where we need to be in 2 years, 5 years, and 10 years. Because every time you change direction, like I said, it costs a lot of dough.
You mentioned you joined the military during the Cold War. For a lot of younger folks, they may not remember, but there was a time where Russia was considered an adversary. And even today, many of us believe that Russia is not an ally. But I'm curious how you think about U.S.-Russia sort of relations. Obviously, you've got the Moscow Mitch poster behind you. So what's your take on Russia? Are they friend, foe, frenemy, something else?
Foe. Oh, no, foe all the way. And, in a way, the Cold War was simple. It was this binary world. And big wars were unthinkable. because they were, apocalyptic end of the world events. And so while we were involved in a lot of proxy wars and dirty business and things like that. It was, as a military guy, it was simple. You knew the way that we knew everything about them. They knew everything about us. And in a bizarre way, the world was safer and less confused. And I'm not yearning for the good old days. But so Russia is now the same threat, but without the discipline, and without the focus and without the central control. Now it's just about, it's funny. You're talking about Mitch McConnell and bringing pork to Kentucky. And if you don't mind, I'll give you a good illustrative example.
Sure.
All right. We all know Oleg Deripaska, right? Russian oligarch, Rusal, under sanctions. And so Mitch McConnell, Senate Majority Leader, refuses to take to reauthorize the sanctions on someone is typing on my computer, but I will go ahead, knock yourself out.
No, keep going. Sorry. Keep going.
So Mitch was against continuing the sanctions on the oligarch. Why would he be against that?
That's a great question. Now, why would he be against that? Well, because if you let those sanctions lapse and this Russian oligarch gets his $3 billion back, then he can invest $200 million in an aluminum rolling plant in Eastern Kentucky. And so within 3 days of allowing those sanctions to lapse, we had the promise of a brand new aluminum rolling plant that's going to employ hundreds of people. Haven't put a shovel in the ground. In fact, the only people who've really ponied up the money for this are the taxpayers of Kentucky. We're on the hook for $15 million, and we are now partners in a soon-to-be built or someday to be built aluminum plant with a Russian criminal boss. Thank you, Mitch McConnell. And that's what Mitch McConnell gets. So he can go to northeastern Kentucky and say, I created all these jobs. Look at what I've done. But at what price? And people who's really committed are the Kentucky taxpayers. And I'm guessing we're never going to see that money back. It's gone. So that's kind of wrap it up, because that is Mitch McConnell in a nutshell. That's and so, like I said before, it was just force against force, and it was simple and less dangerous. And now it's the strength of Russia, but with like no discipline and just based on greed. And that has bled over to Washington. So absolutely a threat.
Do you think the Kentuckians are they okay with that kind of, I hate to say it, but quid pro quo? Like they get the factory, but
what is this quid pro quo of which you speak?
Like do Kentuckians, is it sort of like, well, it's not the ideal thing, but we get a factory, we get jobs, maybe that's okay? Or do you think it's obfuscated and people aren't connecting the dots as well?
No, I think that, Kentucky's economy is terrible. We have horrible access to healthcare. And I think that it's reasonable for them to not ask them to think about grand ideas when, they're working 2 or 3 jobs and they're one illness away from being on the street. And so, I try to communicate that to them, and that's why you have to try to describe another path forward that's more equitable and is just as realistic as in that transactional relationship we have, was, go for me and I'll give you money. And so that's my mission, is to try to take a transformational rather than a transactional approach to this election race.
Mike, we got to call out Shay Ellison, who just dropped a Benjamin to Mike for KY.com.
Well, thank you. And the volunteers, thank you as well. So thanks, guys.
They're gonna have more than asparagus to show for their efforts.
Thanks, Jay. Appreciate it.
Hey, someone was also asking if you had considered going on the Hill Rising show, because I think one of the hosts might be from Kentucky. Have you reached out to them at all? Or
actually, we have, and that's Crystal Ball you're talking about.
Yeah.
She's going to be here in Kentucky hosting a Senate debate. She's actually going to be the moderator of our Senate candidate debate. So we'll be seeing Crystal Ball here real soon. And to answer your question, I've had a real hard time getting traction with national press. And because, to be honest with you, the DSCC has selected the candidate, and that's the way it goes. But we're not going to go that way. And so I'd rather do this. I'd rather do this all day, anyways. Talk to you.
Yeah, that's really interesting. So the party has blessed an individual, and then I guess the media will say, well, we'll cover who the party kind of has decided already. That doesn't sound super democratic with the small D. Yeah.
And people always say, gosh, you need to do something to get some, you need to do something to get some attention. I'm like, well, at this point, I mean, I guess I can go stick up a liquor store or something, but that's the only thing. I mean, it's okay. We're grinding on this. And I think that there's going to be a slow realization that there actually is a primary in Kentucky. And that's been the hardest part, is actually convincing people that there is a primary, because the DSCC has said, this is our candidate.
Right.
And actually, to the point of it, I don't want to sound like a conspiracy nut, but literally putting the thumb on like digital media companies and saying, you are not going to work for these other candidates if you ever want to get another dollar from the party. And that's our party. That's maybe not yours, but it's my party. And so we're not just fighting Mitch McConnell, but we're fighting our own party.
Yeah, the party. Well, I have to say, I as a former Republican who then switched to Democrat in 2008, I've always felt like the party, they kind of influence the nominees, who gets nominated, a little too much, in my opinion. And certainly, I think for the Yang Gang, we many of us feel like maybe our candidate didn't get as fair of a shot. But hopefully, you in Kentucky will break through that noise and kind of be a fresh perspective. Because I have to say, I mean, just in our chat today, I love the diversity of your background. Like, yes, of course, like ex-military, and thank you for your service, by the way, like putting yourself in harm's way for our country. Most people don't do that. But we all benefit from that. So I want to thank you for that. But also being a teacher, editor of a paper, a farmer, like you're a guy that probably doesn't look at things in a black and white kind of perspective. You have like a more holistic view because of all of this experience. And then it's so refreshing to see someone who wants to go to DC that isn't like in their 70s. And, you've got a few more years left in you, which is great. Even though it's your birthday.
Hey, this has been great, man. I'll tell you what, I'll come on anytime. You got a hole in your schedule. And if people are interested, we'll talk about anything, man.
Now, Mike, I also understand that you guys have an AMA coming up. So do you want to tell people like what that's all about and where they can find you?
Well, I'll tell you what, it's at 2 p.m. Eastern today. And it's actually, I've not been a Reddit guy before. And so people kept shaking their heads going, well, you ask for it, they're going to ask you anything. So I'm looking forward to it. And I don't know exactly the data. I think that is there a link that they go to, or is there a subreddit?
They go to the Mike for Kentucky Twitter. It's posted there. So okay.
Mike for Kentucky Twitter's got the link, I guess, to the.
All right.
But yeah,
you'll be on the hot seat on Reddit. Be careful. Reddit's a little bit of the Wild West.
That's all right.
Well, Mike, I just want to thank you for coming on the show. It's been a real pleasure. I hope everybody will check out mikeforky.com to learn more about you and your policies, your background. If they have time, go participate and help share out the AMA. If you guys have enjoyed this interview, please like it, because this will be available on replay and then other people will discover Mike. Any parting words or final things that you want to share with the audience before we wrap up?
No, but thanks, nerds. I appreciate it.
All right. We will say goodbye, nerds.
Bye, nerds. Peace.